I will break you. Bane is a huge character, both physically and storyline-wise in the comics, being introduced in the early 90s for the Knightfall series. Now we're bringing him to the animated series, and does this one little episode do this huge character justice? Well, we're talking about Bane right now. Hello friends, welcome back to the show. So glad to see you once again, and if you're new here, welcome. This is the show. If you grew up on Batman the Animated Series and became a huge Batman fan today, well, here we talk about each and every episode 20 plus years later. Well, today we're talking about the first episode of Season 3, Bane, which originally aired on September 10th, 1994. So here we are kicking off Season 3 with a huge story. I was surprised when I was a kid, and I'm just as surprised now that they even attempted this story for Batman the Animated Series. Although now we've had some really good movie versions of Bane. Not that one, this one.
Then I will break you.
This episode actually followed up pretty close to the Knightfall comics in the early 90s, but we'll get into all that right after our 60-second rundown of the episode. Here we go. A woman is waiting at the airport to pick up this huge giant of a man wearing a mask and brings him back to Rupert Thorne, who she works for, and Rupert Thorne has hired this assassin to be able to take care of Batman, and he pays him in diamonds, and he looks at the paper and he goes, okay, I'm going to go after Croc, and he goes, oh, I didn't hire you to go after Croc, I want you to go after Batman. He goes, wherever there's villains, then I'm going to be able to find Batman. They find Croc at this warehouse, taking down these gangsters and stuff, and when he's trying to get away, Batman and Robin are tracking him, and Croc runs into Bane, and he venoms up himself and he beats up Croc very easily, and Batman and Robin are taking Croc out of there and goes, boy, this has got to be some guy to be able to defeat Croc this way. And they go and find the Batmobile and see it crunched by hand, and so they take the Batmobile back to the Batcave, and they're working on this and trying to figure out what's going on, and Batman is doing some research, and he goes, oh, something that was said, I think this is the guy from this prison that they were doing some testing on and it went wrong, and he escaped, and he's got these super muscle ability. And then meanwhile we have Candace and Bane are getting very cozy, and they're talking with each other, and they're going to be her plan is to double cross Rupert Thorne and take the money for themselves and that, and they're surveillancing him, and Robin is watching this, and so Bane goes after Robin and captures him and goes, oh, this is bait, and Batman will come and get him. And then so it works, Batman goes and finds them, and Robin's hanging upside down ready to be killed, and Bane is fighting Batman, and Candace is fighting Robin, and Batman's eventually able to take down Bane by turning up and throwing up throwing a batarang to his venom, and it explodes, and he's filled up with rage, and Batman gets away. It's a lot. It's a lot.
And when I understand how he thinks and fights, I will break him.
So let me start by talking about that this is the first episode of the third season, and I would be remiss not to mention that this is also the point where they switched from it being the kind of untitled Batman the Animated Series to now being The Adventures of Batman and Robin, which also means that they have a completely new title sequence showing clips of the show of Batman and Robin taking down criminals and working together, which in my opinion is not as good as the original opening, which was based on the pilot that Bruce Timm originally pitched to Warner Brothers. And that sequence of just Batman taking down these mobsters is done so well, and it sets the tone of the show. We're missing out on that. There's a couple of clips that are pulled from that. So around the time that I started collecting comic books in the early 90s was when they were doing the whole Knightfall series, crossing multiple titles in the Batman comics, which is where Bane was first introduced. Now, this is a massive story. It goes from Knightfall to Knightquest to Knight's End, spans several months in the comic books, and this kind of followed the death of Superman, that series, which was really popular, and now they put Batman up against this villain, Bane, who in the comics actually breaks Batman's back and puts Batman Batman out of commission, and he gets John Paul Valley, Azrael, to take over the Batman mantle, and eventually Dick Grayson takes over Batman, and it causes this strife between Tim Drake and the Robin at the time and Batman. It's just a huge story. And I think because this was kind of the early days of me collecting comic books, that this story is really close to me. And as a matter of fact, I was digging through and looking at most of these old comics that I had. This is actually the issue right here where he breaks his back of Batman number 497, Knightfall 11. I've got some neat issues here, and just go. Oh, here we go. This is Batman 500 with the foil cover. This is Knightfall number 19. I think this is the first issue of the Night Quest series from Detective Comics with Azrael Batman there. And in fact, you probably never noticed this, but the comic that's on the wall here is actually a Knightfall comic where Batman first meets Bane, which is actually Knightfall number 18, Detective Comics 666, and it's autographed by Chuck Dixon and Scott Hanna and Graham Nolan. And it's been hanging on the wall this whole time, and you never even noticed it.
What do you think, Batman?
And at that time, I don't know if they had the graphic novel version of it, or it was probably too expensive for me to buy, but I was able to buy the novelization of it. And it's funny because when I pulled this off the shelf today, I don't know if you can see, but it's really yellowed. This is old. This came out in 95. I've read this at least twice when I was a kid. I just loved this story. And so when I was a kid, I was really hard on this episode because I knew the story of Bane and Knightfall so well that there was aspects of this episode that I was really disappointed in that they didn't do justice to as they did in the comics. As I'm now older and looking back on this, I can understand a little bit better why they made some of the choices that they did. Obviously, they were not going to be able to actually break Batman's back in the animated series. It wasn't going to be able to be as violent as it was in the comics. And they had 22 minutes. Again, they had this huge story to put into this. I mean, it's a cartoon after all, so they have to kind of do a reduced version of the story. And I think once you take away some of the really violent aspects of that, you end up with this story. So I think in those regards, it was done well. And I think that they address the idea that this is a really strong threat to Batman, but still, I think the need was Batman had to come out victorious. And really, I'm most happy that they got the line, "I will break you," in the animated series.
You are beaten. Now I will break you.
And I like that they establish how strong Bane is by having him take down Croc, who up to now, I think Croc has been one of the stronger villains that Batman faces. And so you get to see Batman and Robin kind of reacting to that, going, wow, he really did a number on Killer Croc. What could he do to us? And then they walk out and see the Batmobile and go, wow, well, he destroyed this Batmobile with his bare hands. We better look out.
I think you're right about one thing, Robin. Whoever did this was tough. This was done with bare hands.
A couple of missed opportunities in this is that the Batmobile's broken, and we show Robin working on the Batmobile, and Alfred just kind of watching him. And why not bring back Earl? This would have been a great time to have Earl back in the episode. We talked about that before in The Mechanic, where they introduced Earl and then never really used him. Well, here's a great opportunity that they could have showed them taking the Batmobile to Earl and see him working on it a little bit.
He trashed my car, Alfred. Between a couple of guys, that's real personal.
And the other thing they do nice is they do this quick little synopsis of where Bane came from, and they altered his story a little bit for the animated series for whatever reason. They have Batman just kind of do this snapshot, looking at articles, piecing this together of who he is.
It was abandoned when they got more than they bargained for.
And what was that, sir?
They got Bane.
They just have Batman justify looking on his Batmobile computer and going, oh, this must be this guy. But they don't talk much about the Venom, which ends up being how Batman is able to defeat him. So they could have done a little bit more in that area of establishing how Batman plans to stop him.
He knows you better than you know yourself.
Batman kind of blindly runs into the situation because he captures Robin, and so he just reacts and goes after goes after Bane. So Batman just kind of seemingly just kind of impromptu throws the Batarang into his device and is able to spray the venom, I guess forces more venom into Bane and makes it erupt that way.
The Venom! Can't stop it!
And I guess that way works. I mean, and again, the movie Batman and Robin kind of stole that version of the Bane death, but they had Bane as a small guy. I'm not going to get into that. There's also a recycled shot here in where Batman is lifting Croc out of the sewer, and they did the same thing in Vengeance. How many times does Batman lift Croc out of the sewer? And I guess all in all, what's nice is that they didn't try to take the whole Knightfall story and condense it down into an episode. They kind of only took that first part up until the confrontation with Bane and then twisted it all around and kind of told their own story, borrowed some components from the Knightfall story, but kind of told their own Bane story. And I like that rather than trying to doing the Saturday morning cartoon version of this pretty violent big story. And there would have been no way for them to really tackle the Batman being laid up with his back broken and Dick Grayson becoming Batman or introducing John Paul Valley as Batman or anything like that. They just kind of left that stuff off and certainly left it open to do other components.
Is this the best you can throw at me, Rupert?
So when it comes time to rank this episode, I honestly was a lot easier on this episode now than I would have been when I was 12. Back then, if I would have been ranking the episodes, this probably would have been the lowest bottom of the list because, like I said, I was just so close to the source material in the comics at this point that I felt like this was just this episode was just an abomination of what they should be doing with Bane. But not understanding ratings and audiences and understanding that not everybody had read the comics like I had and all those components. So I'm much easier on it now. And so looking at it just as an episode of Batman the Animated Series, I ended up placing it at the number 38 spot of my favorite episodes. I have it just below the Clock King because as different of an episode as the Clock King is, I think there's more background to the Clock King story, and there's more layers to that character of why he became a villain, whereas Bane is just kind of two-dimensional. Here's a hired hitman, he's going to go kill Batman. But it does beat out Be a Clown because it is that darker kind of episode. Be a Clown is a little bit more lighthearted, although it does have child abduction in it, but it is a bit of a darker, just fighting Batman fighting a strong adversary versus Be a Clown, which is just a little more lighthearted of an episode, like what often is the case with Joker episodes.
Don't bet on it, killer. Later, Gator.
So as I was doing this episode, I was realizing that there's a lot to talk about with Knightfall, and obviously is a storyline that I'm really passionate about. So are you as familiar with that story? Do you remember reading that in the comics? And part two of the question is, would you like to see me do a full video on the Knightfall series and talk about the story in the comics and my memories of that story, going back and looking through some of my old comics of Knightfall? If you would enjoy to see that type of episode, let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit that like button. And if you want to see more of these episodes, click the subscribe button along with the little bell notification, because we have new episodes coming out every Tuesday and Thursday. And next Tuesday, we have another episode coming out with Second Chance. So you're not going to want to miss that. As always, I'm Andy Knode. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.